Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie begins with a news story running on multiple news channels regarding the biggest cash robbery in US history. Next, Detective James Ransom asks two questions: first, where is Chris, and second, where is the money? Then the movie goes on 3 months before, when Eddie is indulging in a fight with his boss and quits the job. Chris comes to save him from getting hit and takes him along to his mother's house with a statue as a gift. Chris goes to meet Tommy, his father, who was a policeman back in Greece, but in New York, he works as a toilet cleaner in the shady club of Spiro. While both are having a conversation, Spiro walks in, interrupting their talk and insulting Tommy. Chris infuriates and warns him to not say such things in front of him. Tommy tries to assuage his anger. But when he leaves, he says to Spiro to not insult him in front of his son. Chris and his family are at home. Daily household chores are going on. He asks his sister to put on some clothes. His father is making coffee for himself. His sister yells back at him. Her mother comes in to pacify everyone. He tells his father that he wants to become a policeman like him and how this job is going to change their family conditions. His sister brings the letters from outside. He opens and the letter reads, but the request is denied. He gets rejected from the NYPD because of a previous marijuana conviction. Unfortunately, years earlier, he and Eddie were busted for smoking pot at a Black Sabbath concert. This went on his permanent record, and that one blemish denied him a chance to be a cop like his father. He is disheartened. In a dire situation, he applies for a security guard job and succeeds in landing one in Empire New York Securities Incorporated. Tony, who has been with the organization for a long time, takes him under his wing. Many shady things take place at the Empire. Tony reveals to Chris about security is extremely poor and no reliable records are kept of money collected or stored, but it's none of their business. He also tells Chris about his family and shows his wife and daughter's picture pasted in front of the driver's seat. One fine day, they both go to deliver the things, but a burglary takes place, bombing the vehicle. Tony gets shot by one of the burglars in front of Chris. He meets James Ransom, the detective and cop, for the first time. Ransom interrogates Chris. He suspects Chris of being a part of a burglary, but due to the absence of evidence, leaves him. Chris is once again thrust into a world of crime as he tries to make something out of the situation he's in, eventually leading to greater and more dangerous repercussions than he could imagine. As a result of the incident, the security company takes Chris off of the truck and assigns him to the overnight desk job guarding the money in the company's building. While doing his night duty, he goes upstairs just to come across a document stating compensation given to Tony's family. Only $5,000 in compensation was given, rather than the $50,000 they are entitled to. This agitates Chris. The next day, he steals approximately $25,000 from the office's secret stockpile and gives some of the cash to his partner's widow. He makes the mistake of showing the money to his loud-mouthed best friend Eddie and telling him about the company's worse than lax security. They both go to a club to celebrate the money. Eddie, inebriated in money's happiness, sees Mike and Jimmy in the VIP section. He goes to him, and with the motive of impressing them, he gives them a costly wine. The next day, Chris walks into the restaurant to find Eddie sharing this information with Mike and Jimmy. Initially, Chris became angry with Eddie, but later on, he agrees with them, and all four stages a robbery. Eddie thinks it's a good idea to steal the millions of dollars that are stacked at this place, with little security. Along with some other small-time criminals, they plan to take it all, but they have to be careful. While they are executing the plan, it is failed by Ransom, who has been tipped off. Chris informs Eddie about the police, but eventually, a gun battle ensues. One robber is killed, and the other is caught by Ransom. The robber tries to shoot James, but he is saved by Chris, who shoots the robber, killing him. Outside, Eddie and Mike meet Jimmy. Mike suspects Jimmy to be a traitor and shoots him dead. Eventually, two of the robbers are killed. Chris becomes the hero in front of society as news of his shooting of the robber gets published. His mother and other people are assembled outside his house, applauding his courage. But he is disturbed. He sees Eddie there, and Eddie tells him that they will have to get the money anyhow to get out of the situation. He tries to make him understand about not getting into all this again, but Eddie gets mad and says he will do it alone. Later, on December 12, 1982, Eddie bursts through the roof in the middle of the night, and he hectors a weak-willed Chris into opening the vault and demands Chris hand over the keys. He starts to act insane. Chris panics and tries to stop him, saying how he is going to explain the robbery. He shows Eddie the camera. Eddie bashes him and knocks out the camera in front of the safe. Eddie steals $11 million in cash, the single largest cash robbery in U.S. history, exceeding the $5.8 million LaFonza heist in December 1978. Later, Eddie gives $3 million of the loot to Chris. The city is in the commotion the next morning, and Eddie is nowhere to be found at the crime scene. Ransom and the FBI reach the crime scene. Chris is lying injured there. They interrogate him about last night. He says that everything was fine, he was talking on the phone when someone hit him in the face. His story seems to be fabricated, but no one doubted seeing his condition. The FBI initially believes it was the work of the organized crime syndicate Cosa Nostra. FBI goes after the 5 families of organized crime, but Ransom decides that Chris, Eddie and their associates need to be investigated. FBI agents do not believe that 2 morons like Eddie and Chris could have planned the heist, but the experienced detective Ransom follows his instincts to solve the case. Chris and Eddie noted their name on top in the most wanted list of NYPD Detective James, as well as the local crime bosses after them too. Ransom follows Chris and listens to their talk. The latter, drugged up, informs or rather yells at the former how he is about to hand him $8 million. Chris hits Eddie in the face for hitting him earlier. They both yell at each other, and Eddie walks away. Ransom continues to follow Eddie as he meets Mike and intends to travel to Colombia for a dirty cocaine deal. Ransom even visits Spiro's den, showing that Mike is aware of the extraordinary break-in. Following that, Ransom searches the crime database for the faces of Mike and Eddie, who are both small-time criminals. Chris does not realize that Ransom has Mike and Eddie's images when he goes to the police station to answer some standard inquiries. Furthermore, Ransom says to Chris he had told him there was one guy who broke in, but Chris replies indifferently that he hadn't seen anyone as he was talking on the phone. He didn't know how many men were there. Ransom further asks him whether he believes Eddie is speaking to someone in the tapes when he shows him the video footage of the camera near the safe shortly before it went dead. He asks him if the burglar had looked at the camera before hitting it, as if someone had just told him about it. He denies knowing anything about that. Later, Ransom visits Eddie's office, where he discovers a rough sketch of the heist in his locker. After inquiry, Chris is called upon by Spiro's man. He hesitantly gets into the car. Spiro asks him about robbery money and tells him about meeting a person. Meanwhile, Mike transports Eddie to the Colombian. They give the money to the mobster without checking the coke, but it's not like they're going to receive it anyhow. The Colombian requests that the party turn around and leave after the money has been counted. During a fight, Mike becomes a martyr while Eddie flees for his life. Ransom arrests Eddie and asks where Chris and the rest of the money are, but Eddie says nothing and is released. Chris tells his friend Nancy the money is hidden in a statue that he and Eddie had given to his mother. Eddie makes his way to Chris's back porch, where he bargains with him for additional money. Tommy, meanwhile, comes out the door, brandishing a revolver at Eddie. They are quickly apprehended by the cops. A decade later, Chris and Eddie are released from federal prison, but the money is never recovered. The end.